Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. Once again, it's time for the Q&A, so let's go ahead and knock this out. And I think I'm going to do 3 parts today. I had a lot of questions, and I still feel like 3 parts isn't going to even get to all the questions that were there, not even close. More subscribers seems to equal more questions right now. So let's go ahead and get this started. All right, first question. What are some good 3-day-a-week full-body intermediate programs for people who have finished their novice phase? Also, could you possibly make another full-body program but for intermediates? Thank you, Jason. It's not a bad idea. I might work on a full body for intermediates. Basics similar to something like what I'm doing right now during my cut wouldn't be unreasonable. Just figuring out the progression pattern and the loading and everything. But usually a lot of intermediate programs, because there's a lot of good ones out there. I mean, I think you'll find like Mad Cows or the Texas Method. What I would say, though, with either one of those, Mad Cows or the Texas Method, perfect examples. You probably need to add some additional accessory work in, right? I think they need a little more volume. Wouldn't be a bad idea. But that's the thing, with accessory work, you can work that stuff in. But what you usually see are heavy, medium, light. And oftentimes that gets compared a little bit to undulating periodization, but it's not quite the same because a lot of these programs, you're sticking at the same rep range, you're just adjusting, you're not lifting the same weight necessarily every day. So you kind of have a heavy, medium, light day. And it might be where you have a day where you go to an all-out 5-rep max. You have a day where you do a 5x5 with a certain percentage, and then maybe a 5x5 or a 3x5 with slightly lighter weight than your 5x5 day. So you really end up with a heavy, medium, light day because of that. So that's usually how a lot of the better intermediate programs go as far as full body goes. But you could limit volume and not do peak sets, or not necessarily limit volume so much as not go to all out 5-rep maxes, and you could probably just do a nice, really, really slow linear progression, which means stuff like adding 2.5 pounds a week and things like that. And, and in some cases even less for smaller exercises. So that might be a different way you could do it, or you could do stuff with like rep goals, where you do like 3x5s and things like that, and maybe the third set you kind of take it close to failure, do AMRAP, and when you can get to like 6 or 7 reps, maybe on the third set, it's time to increase the weight. So that's another way you could approach it as well. All right, next question. Hi, Jason. I currently only train 6 movements, still on a 5x5, but basically intermediate. Weighted pull-up, strict press, back squat, Pendlay Row, closed grip bench press, conventional deadlift. I'm going to say as an intermediate, it's my opinion, if you're going to do a lot of those, you may not be able to do 5x5 anymore unless you're bulking. Now, if you're bulking, you can probably get away with 5x5 with maybe up to 4 of those lifts, on a full body system 3 days a week. I think you can get away with that. Just be very, very leery of that deadlift. I would say the deadlift training on a 5x5 can be absolutely brutal. I would not do that more than once a week. Again, just because of the sort of workloads involved. So that might be something to where, again, you maybe do on your Friday, on something like a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and maybe rotate through, again, those other exercises on the other 3 days. Like you could alternate some of that, or like I said, do 4 of them. 4 of them. And you could basically squat on all 3 days, and then those other exercises you have 4 different lifts. You could kind of rotate through those in different patterns so that you're not necessarily hitting each thing as hard every single time. So hopefully you see what I mean. You've got 4 different exercises. You could pick different 3s of those and rotate them through on a pattern. That wouldn't be a bad method if you wanted to do all of those and still stick with a 5x5. But if you're going to do the deadlift in there also with it, I would stick to it maybe just on Friday. Like if you do a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, so that you have 2 days off. That's just the direction I would go, with something like what you're doing. I think it's perfectly reasonable. I think you continue to make fantastic gains doing that. Those 6 exercises cover all your bases pretty well. And I see no reason you can't get really big and strong still doing that. And if the volume of the 5x5 becomes too much, cutting back to a 3x5 with a couple of ramp-up sets wouldn't be bad either. All right, next question. Is deadlifting necessary for bodybuilding, or can I do other weightlifting? Then you guys see my response down there, and I know it's an argument of semantics, but it's one I want to keep keep in check in this channel. I don't like people referring to training for size as bodybuilding, because bodybuilding is one word. That's a competitive endeavor. Building your body is not the same as bodybuilding any more than playing with a football is the same as football, right? Two different things. So I recommend you avoid bodybuilding. Deadlift's good, bodybuilding bad. Now, I'm being tongue-in-cheek there, and I'm being a little facetious over an argument of semantics, and let's kind of go back to the point. I think deadlifts are perfectly fine for hypertrophy training, for even size phases, again, particularly because of the strength component they carry over. However, it could be reasonably argued that when you're doing any sort of respectable volume work, that the normal conventional deadlift, and by that token even a sumo deadlift, may not give you the best tension versus fatigue ratios that you're looking for when you're increasing the volume of training for size phases. Again, hypertrophy phases where you are bulking, and that's what we'll assume you mean by bodybuilding. You're trying to put on size rapidly, which usually requires a bit more training volume, right? You're going to be in a calorie surplus. You're going to be doing a little higher reps, a little higher volume, even if it's not reps. Again, that's where things like the deficit deadlift, the snatch grip deadlift, things like that do shine in those phases, because they do offer you, because you use a slightly lighter weight, they do give you slightly better fatigue management versus the amount of hypertrophy that they stimulate compared to like your normal deadlift. So I might push you in that direction depending on what your recovery and stuff looks like. All right, next question. Jason, in a recent video you stated that rows should be done from the floor. Does this mean it's better to do Pendlay rows on your novice 5x5 instead of leaving the weight hanging in the air after the eccentric part of the bent over rows? Thanks. Yeah, I've said in the past many years ago, over 5 years ago, I said a few different times on the novice program, yes, that's what I would like to see you do. And that's kind of where we come to the interesting context. People are all talking about these bodybuilder style rows that have come into vogue, I don't know, in the 80s or 90s. That's not really traditional rows. Now, Glenn Pendlay always laughs and says, I don't know why they call them Pendlay rows, because I just call them rows. Like when he programs those, he just calls that a row. And what he means is a really strict row with almost no body English off of the floor, right? That's what he's talking about. But whether you do that or not, whether you do a little bit of cheating or not, traditionally rows were done from the floor. They were done from the floor on every single rep, right? And if a lot of guys do that, they would probably get a little better grip training and not feel the need to use straps, and you hit the lats and everything better. You need to remember, the more upright you start going with a row, it does become more of a trapezius dominant movement. In other words, when you start seeing guys standing up at 45 degrees doing rows, it pretty much at that threshold, guys, it's more trap dominant than it is lats. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. If you're trying to build monstrous traps, hey, maybe that's the way to go, but it is gonna not necessarily give you the total training effect you want of the entire back. So just for reference in the future, rows are supposed to be done from the floor on every rep. And this Pendlay row is just a very, very strict version of it. All right, next question. Hey, Jason, what do you think of a 100, 200, 300, 400, 500 chin-up press, bench, squat, deadlift, lifetime strength standard for someone? And by 100, I mean hanging 100 pounds to your waist. It's funny how the math works that way, huh? And a guy who has those numbers should be jacked AF in every muscle in their body. All right, guys. I kind of like that, because people have always asked me, you don't have any strength standards for those back exercises, right? You always tell guys that what you'd like to see, lifetime goals for most natties, should be able to, if they're just trying to get really jacked, be all around thick and swole, 200 press, 300 bench, 400 squat, 500 deadlift. That should be goals that you try to reach, right? That should be your baseline strength standards that a natural should be able to reach if they're training correctly eventually. Not telling you in your first year or anything crazy like that. If you do that in your first year, you're a genetic freak, right? You are a freak if you pull that off in your first year. I bet you less than 5% of the population could even do that in the most perfect training environment, in a year. But it has been done. I've seen guys who pulled it off, but they're freaks. As far as 100 pull up or chin up, yeah, I think that's reasonable too. And the reason I say that, some people are like, man, that's the heaviest we've seen you get to, Jason, and you've beat all those lifts on camera by significant amounts. I know, but I've been at a much higher body fat doing it. I was over 20% body fat doing it. What this does by adding a standard in like that body composition starts to matter. Because if you're really fat, if you're like I was, 20% plus body fat, and you're really, really gonna have to be strong in order to do a 100-pound pull-up or chin-up. You know, like you guys saw me benching, at least every single thing on there I've surpassed by 10 to 30%, those other standards, at that body fat. So that goes to show you that it would actually force you to be a leaner guy in order to barely hit all of those numbers at the same time. So that's an interesting control for body composition and the strength standards, and I like that. I may use that in the future, brother. I appreciate it. No, I like that a lot. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time in part 2.